I've argued that there's no such thing as free will. So what is there? Well, there's luck, both good and bad, as well as what we make of it. Actually, that's not quite true. What you make of your luck is also just more luck. Once again, you didn't pick your parents. You didn't pick the society into which you were born. There's not a cell in your body or brain that you created. Nor is there a single influence coming from the outside world that you brought into being. And yet, everything you think and do arises from this ocean of prior causes. So, what you do with your luck, and the tools with which you do it, even down to the level of the effort and discipline you manage to summon in each moment, is more in the way of luck. Now, most people resist this idea, seemingly at any intellectual cost, for reasons that I can't understand.
Really?
And determinism is the idea that a complete description of the condition of the universe at any point in time, together with a complete list of all the laws of nature, would entail all other truths about the universe, including all truths about everything you'll ever do. Okay, that's determinism. So now we have a premise. Either the universe is deterministic or it isn't. Now suppose it is. Then some philosophers say, well, you can't have free will in that case because you could never have done otherwise than you did. All right, so that's one horn here, that determinism is true. The other horn is, well, suppose determinism isn't true. Then what do you have now? Well, they say randomness at the point of decision. So now you could decide this, you could decide that, but which one you decide is a matter of chance or luck.
And so that's not free will either.
That's what they say. Either way, then, there's no free will. But still, people feel as though they're free, and so the claim is, well, that feeling is an illusion. Now, the way most people who don't buy the argument attack it is they attack one horn or the other. So there are philosophers called compatibilists. And compatibilists say that even if determinism is true, people can act freely. What compatibilists think is that what you need is to be responsive to reasons in a certain way, so that if the reasons had been different, you would or might have acted differently.
Even though there was no possibility that the reasons were different based on the universe that we live in.
That's right. So that's one way to go. The other way to go is to say, no, you're right, free will does require that determinism be false, but the falsity of determinism doesn't just put you at the mercy of chance or randomness or luck. You're still enough in control of what you do to act freely. That kind of response is called a libertarian response. So the pro-free will views then divide into those two camps.
Attack one or the other of these problems.
That's right. One kind are called compatibilists, the other kind are libertarian.
Here's the argument that free will is an illusion. If determinism is true, then every event is fixed by a previous event, and there is no room for free will. And if determinism is false, then randomness rules, and we do not have sufficient control of our actions.
My own view is this. Either compatibilism is true or libertarianism is true. That either-or proposition is more credible than the opposing proposition, which is no free will either way, free will is an illusion. The libertarian part of the project I think is more interesting. So you can sort of see this problem about luck or randomness. What are you going to do about that? How do you save libertarianism? The answer is decisions you made in the past have a bearing on how your life goes. You can learn from the consequences of those decisions and adjust your thinking about the future. So past decisions have effects on future decisions. They can actually shape the probabilities of future decisions. So I say that if you look at people just at moments in time, just snapshots of them internally, this luck problem looms large. But if you consider what people can do to change their luck, as it were, they start looking more like they could be free agents.
Philosophically, free will seems to contradict any description of the physical world. Scientifically, free will seems to be an artificial construct of our brain-generated inner awareness. So is free will a massive illusion? The more one studies the brain, the more one finds electrical patterns preceding conscious awareness. But if free will were an illusion, could we trust anybody about anything? I recall again Dennett's wisdom.
I devised to jangle the nerves of neuroscientists who've been going around saying that neuroscience shows that we don't have free will. I think their reasons for saying that are ill-considered, and moreover, that what they're doing is apt to be mischievous and doing some real harm. So I concocted a little thought experiment, a little intuition pump, to suggest that. So this is the case of the nefarious neurosurgeon who treats a patient who has obsessive compulsive disorder by inserting a little microchip in his brain which controls the OCD, the obsessive compulsive disorder. Now there is such a chip. It's been developed in the Netherlands and it works really quite well. That's science fact, but now here comes science fiction. So the neurosurgeon, after she's operated on the guy, sewed him all up. So okay, your OCD is under control now. You'll be happy to learn. But moreover, our team here will be monitoring you 24/7, and we're going to be controlling everything you do from now on. You'll think you have free will. You'll think you're making your own decisions, but really you won't have free will at all. Free will is an illusion that we will maintain while controlling you. Goodbye, have a nice life. Sends him out the door. Well, he believes her. She had a shiny lab and lots of degrees and diplomas and all that. So what does he do? Well, thinking he doesn't have free will anymore, he gets a little self-indulgent, a little bit aggressive, a little negligent in how he decides what to do. And pretty soon, by indulging some of his worst features, he's got himself in trouble with the law. And he's arrested and he's put on trial. And at the trial, he says, "But Your Honor, I don't have free will. I'm under the control of the team at the neurosurgery clinic." I say, "What's this?" And they call the neurosurgeon to the stand. They said, "Did you tell this man that you were controlling his every move? He didn't have free will?" She says, "Yeah, I did, yeah. But I was just messing with his head. That was just a joke. I didn't think he'd believe me." Now, right there, I think we can stop, take a deep breath, and say, well, she did something really bad. She really harmed that man. In fact, her little joke telling him that actually accomplished non-surgically pretty much what she claimed to accomplish surgically. She disabled him. By telling him he didn't have free will, she pretty much turned his free will off and turned him into a morally incompetent person. Now, if we agree that she did a bad thing, if nobody recommends people play jokes like this, what are we to say about the neuroscientists who are telling the public every day, "We've shown in our neuroscience labs that nobody has free will"? I think if the neuroscientists recognize that what my imaginary neurosurgeon did was irresponsible, they should think seriously about whether it's irresponsible of them to make these claims about free will. And it's not just a fantasy. Vos and Schooler, in an important paper which has been replicated in several different ways, set up an experiment really to test this with college students who were given two texts to read. One was a text, they were both from Francis Crick's book, The Astonishing Hypothesis, and one was not about free will, and the other was about free will, and basically it said, free will is an illusion. All your decisions are actually determined by causes that neuroscience is investigating. You don't have free will, that's just an illusion. All right, so we have two groups, the group that read that passage and the group that read another passage from that book of the same length. After they've read the passage, they are given a puzzle to solve where they can earn some money by solving it. And the experimenters cleverly made the puzzle slightly defective, so there was a way of cheating on the puzzle that was, inadvertently revealed to the subjects. And guess what? The subjects who'd read the passage where Crick says free will is an illusion cheated at a much higher rate than the other ones. In other words, just reading that passage did have the effect of making them less concerned about the implications of their action, and just they became, as it were, negligent.
With or without free will, beliefs have consequences. And part of living an examined life is putting one's beliefs in order. And one's beliefs about free will are no exception.
Talk a little bit about jumping outside the system. And this is kind of the cool renegade stuff that Hofstadter fills his book with. And it's the idea that as you're playing around with this, right now you're just playing a game. And what mathematicians and what anybody human does is when they feel like they're caught in loops, just cranking through pages of algebra and they're not getting anywhere, humans are intelligent enough to stop. They exit the system and they say, I don't know, I don't think this is going to go anywhere. Or, well, let me think about why I'm not getting, or how might I get MU? You know, maybe it has something to do with numbers of I's and U's or things like that. I'm not sure. You start doing what I like to call meta-thinking. You're not thinking in the system, applying typographical rules, applying rules of inference to existing strings, axioms, and getting theorems. That's thinking inside the system. That's just thinking. Meta-thinking involves you leaping outside the system and making judgments about it, thoughts which cannot be expressed as any just normal typographical rule within the system. You're doing meta-thinking.
Hello, what's this?
Because fundamental is in fact a long wavelength, long distance scale property of the vacuum itself.
What does this imply about the universe? If what we think are fundamental concepts, constants, are more concepts than constants?
It means probably we'll eventually have a revolution in thought. Right now, believe it or not, our experiments are so primitive that the confrontation really hasn't happened yet. It's only on the fringes of particle physics that people understand this. But as we get to understand more and more, it will become harder and harder to deny the fact that what we thought was fundamental was just yet another example of something emergent. And probably there's something more fundamental underneath it. I'm a physicist after all, we're all reductionists. But as of this moment, we haven't found them.
Let's target that word you use, because it's a powerful one, emergence. A lot of definitions around, a lot of people use that. I want to know how you define it.
I always define emergence the same way, because it's complicated. I mean a collective principle of organization that gives rise to a law. It means a relationship among measured things that's always true. But the law vanishes away into nothingness when you examine little parts to see where it came from.
Now, some would say the reverse, that you have fundamental laws, and then when they combine together, you have a higher level laws, which are less fundamental than the lower dimensional laws.
This amuses me to no end, because then I ask the person, well, how do you tell the difference?
Oh.
They're both exact. You have red exact and blue exact. Well, of course, the difference between them is ideological. It's a belief system. Scientifically, there's no difference at all.
Because you're defining it in terms of the measurement, in terms of the exactness of the measurement.
Yes.
and the precision by which you have it and the reproducibility of it. And whether that precision is at a higher level, so-called, or a lower level, you don't care if I get this right.
You have, and there's a very concrete reason I do this. When you study science, the real thing, for long enough, you realize that that's the only rock you have to stand on. The only way that scientists have an advantage over everybody else is that they deal with experiments. Ideas, if they're wrong, aren't supported by the experiment, so you throw them out. Your moral authority comes from measurements, not only just measurements of qualitative things, precise quantitative relationships between things. That's what physics is. A part of the theory of the vacuum of space that we now accept as probably right, called the Higgs model. As far as we know, the universe is pervaded by something very much like a superconductor. New experiments, of course, are trying to find out for sure. But that's a beautiful example of taking the tabletop effect and ramifying it to bigger things.
Which would mean that things that exist on a composite level are as fundamental, maybe more fundamental than its component parts, which is a radically different way of thinking.
Well, you say it's radically different, but I don't think so. I think if you step back from the discipline of physics, you'll see that every one of us is an arch conservative. Where we're coming from is measurement. And we're very entertaining when we're talking about things we can imagine, but we're not entertaining when we're talking about measurement. There's no postmodernist belief stuff that happens there. That's true. Okay? So when you have laws, a law is a law. That's the thing that's the miracle of nature. Who said that there should be relationships among measured things that are always true? It isn't at all self-evident. It's a miracle. And I'd see, well, if you have one miracle, why would you expect two? That there should be two kinds of these miraculous things, one that's collective and one that just is. I think more likely the answer is that there's only one kind.
Let me see if I got this right. Let's start with what we know for sure, the results of an experiment, exact measurement. Then we can go in one of two directions. We can go to more fundamental particles, smaller and smaller, or we can take that and go towards organization, towards an emergent property, and it's not necessarily self-evident which way you go. Is that right?
That's right, except I'd like to put it a little more succinctly. What you're really asking is, where did the law come from?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? And one idea is it came about collectively because of principle of organization. And the other idea is that it just is. Okay? The second idea is, in fact, a very profound religious idea that goes back way to the roots of our civilization. Now, you think about it a minute, it doesn't make sense that there would be two kinds of exact thing because they're too miraculous. So probably one of them is a myth. Now, I don't know the answer to this question, but I'm suspicious that the fundamental idea, the idea of fundamental law, the sense of experimental science, may turn out to be completely mythological.
It cannot be seen, cannot be felt, cannot be heard, cannot be smelled. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty holes it fills. It comes first and follows after, ends life, kills laughter. The answer is dark, the dark.
Us now! Now us! My precious!
I'm a quiver with anticipation.
This thing, all things, devours, bursts, beasts, trees, flowers, knows iron, bites steel, grinds, Hearthstones to mead, slays king, ruins town, and beats high mountain down.
Well, interesting. Yes, now, let me see.
What does it answer? What does it answer?
Just a moment now.
My precious, will it taste delicious? Yes, it will.
Give me some time.
What? What does it say?
I said time, time! Whatever is the matter?
Guess! Time is the answer.
So one of my favorite ideas has to do with the experience of time, flow of time. And this touches actually two issues, the issue of free will and the issue of the flow of time. So some of the work that I've been doing with Yakir Haronov is the leader of our group, is we have changed the notion, the usual historical notion of what we understand as time. Usually we say, well, the past is gone, the present exists, but the only things that are relevant to the present are things that happened in the past. And one of the things that Yakir noticed long ago, 50-some years ago, was in fact that was only really half the story. That you needed to, if you really want to understand the present moment, the future played as important a role as the past. And so this led to all kinds of new fundamental discoveries, which we quickly worked hard to make sure they were verified experimentally. In my PhD thesis, I called these things quantum miracles. And what I meant by that were things that you could only discover if you allowed for the possibility that the future was relevant to the present. And so things like the quantum Cheshire cat separating a particle from its properties, or a quantum pigeonhole. These seem to be things that were completely impossible, but as long as we did experiments which include the possibility of the relevance of the future and the present, we got all these new effects that were confirmed. So bringing that back to the issue of free will, that completely changes the whole ballgame.
Or the flow of time.
And the flow of time also. Usually we think of the nature of free will, okay, we're going to make a decision now, right? And the future hasn't happened yet. And so either one result will happen or a different consequence will happen. And but now if you bring in the possibility that something much richer happens with time, that the future could be relevant in those decisions, then it's a whole other way of analyzing it at a very deep and fundamental level. And the kind of things we've discovered that came out of that have been really beautiful. Yeah, when we describe a particle, we use the usual standard way of thinking about it in quantum mechanics, in which you have a state which evolves forward in time, and we use a second state which is specified by just a standard experiment, just like we did in the past when we prepared the particle in some definite state that we knew. In the future, we do another experiment like that, and now we have another wave which is actually going in the opposite arrow of time. And so if you're asking about the nature of the time on a quantum mechanical level, you have time going in both directions. And in a sense, the way the properties of the quantum world show up, you have to sort of kiss in the present, so to speak. And one has to devise all kinds of new ways of observing the quantum world to see how this shows up.
So you're claiming that the movement from the past to the present is equal to the movement from the future to the present?
That's right.
I mean, is that a mathematical formalism that you need, or is that something that you really have evidence for?
Well, there's two answers to this. First of all, it's been proven that this way of expressing the theory is, in fact, equivalent in terms of the predictions it makes to the standard way, which is time asymmetric. So what this means is that, in fact, you cannot say for sure at this level whether the old way of looking at it, the time asymmetric way, is the correct way, or this new way of looking at it. You can't say which one is the correct way. And so at this point, it becomes a question of, well, which approach is more useful? Which approach is more interesting? Does one approach allow you to discover all kinds of new physical phenomena? And it's certainly the case with this time symmetric approach that we have made many new discoveries, particularly concerning the nature of time, where you can distinguish the theories. There is a scenario whereby one could say that, in fact, this time symmetric approach is correct, and the old way of thinking about it, the standard quantum mechanics, time asymmetric approach, is incorrect. And those are situations that we call generalizations of quantum mechanics. These are situations where the new perspective, the new worldview, would lead to a new theory which makes predictions which are inconsistent with the old theory. And then the experimentalists would go out and test to see if those predictions are correct or not.
And the implications of this for this time symmetric, where the movement from past to future is the equivalent of future to past, what are the deep implications for the nature of reality?
Well, if one's considering generalizations of the theory, which can be proven experimentally over the standard way of understanding of time in the quantum realm, I'll give you a couple of implications. For example, one generalization which we created of the theory hasn't been proven yet, but it's very natural. It's very natural to derive it based on the kind of where we started. Is the following question? Our view of the nature of time came out from ancient times. Parmenides in particular, I believe, which he said the way we should think about the universe is that the universe exists with objects, unique objects, which simply change their state in time, but it's the same object from one moment to the next, right? That's, we've accepted this way of thinking about the universe. However, around the same time, in the ancient Greeks, there was a very different way of thinking about the nature of time, which just didn't catch on. And this is from Heraclides. And Heraclides, not many of his words survived all this time, but one of them goes something like this. He said, "You never bathe twice in the same river." And one way of interpreting that is that, in fact, each moment of time, it's not the same universe. It's not the same object as it was a second ago or 100 years ago. But literally, each moment of time is like a new universe. Is something completely new. It gets reborn again and again. And so one might ask, is it possible to reformulate our basic physics in a way that's consistent with that idea? And you can prove that it is impossible on a quantum level to do it with the standard time asymmetric way of thinking about quantum mechanics.
A one-direction.
A one-direction arrow of time. The only way you could do it, if you want to have such a picture, is to use the time symmetric approach, where the past plays, the future plays as much a role in the present as the past. And so using that, an example of a generalization, we were able to reformulate the whole theory in such a way that quite literally, it's a very beautiful mathematical theory, literally every moment is like recreating the universe again and again and again. It's a kind of a psychological illusion that we think that the self I was a fraction of a second ago is the same self I am now. But it works very well. The way it works is we have connections across time, so to speak. We're entangled with different moments, and this entanglement is what actually provides the continuity in the physics. That's just one example to show how the nature of time can be profoundly different in this view, and actually profoundly different from a quantum perspective when compared to a classical physics perspective.
Sean, I like to look at the problem of free will as one of the great probes of what it means to be sentient, conscious, human. My problem may be, as I talk to too many philosophers, and a few theologians thrown in there. Maybe I should talk to physicists more. Can you help me with free will?
I think that you should not talk to physicists about free will. They are generally not any better than the person on the street. But I am a physicist and I will have my opinions, and here we are, so I will give them to you. I think that the idea of strong libertarian free will,
which means that you have an absolute choice to do something other than that which you do.
I would say that the idea that you are a law unto yourself, that you can overcome what you would have thought of the laws of physics. There's no reductionistic explanation where I could understand all your atoms and molecules and predict what you would do. I think that is absolutely nonsense in the sense that we have no evidence for it, no reason to believe it's true. It'd be very, very difficult to reconcile that with what we do know about physics.
Even with quantum mechanics and determinacy?
Yeah, absolutely. It changes nothing at all. We have an absolutely good equation that tells us what's going to happen. There's no room for anything that is changing the predictions of Schrodinger's equation.
But that's a different explanation than normally given. Normally given that quantum mechanics throws up a random explanation, randomness isn't free will. You're making a different point, that you have the prediction of Schrodinger's equation, and so that becomes in its own sense deterministic.
Whether the theory is deterministic or indeterministic is completely beside the point for free will. What matters is it a theory? Does it make predictions that do not require, souls or spirits to get in the way and change those predictions? Mm-hmm. Quantum mechanics, no matter what your formulation of it is a theory. It says that there's an equation that tells you what's going to happen next. It's not up to you what's going to happen next. So no free will in that sense. But I always go back to the example of thermodynamics and statistical mechanics, because that's a place where we have a perfectly rigorously understood case where there is a fundamental theory, atoms and molecules bumping into each other, and there's an emergent theory of temperature and pressure and viscosity and so forth. I think free will is emergent. I don't think it's fundamental, but I had no problems talking about it any more than I have trouble talking about temperature. I don't think that a person can get through the day without speaking of other human beings as making choices. That's because free will, the ability to make choices, is an absolutely crucial part of our emergent macroscopic way of talking about human beings.
But ultimately, those choices that we think we're making in some sense independent of the rest of the physical world is an illusion.
It's not an illusion any more than temperature is an illusion.
Well,
it's an emergent phenomenon that is consistent with the microscopic dynamics.
Yeah, but that's if the analogy with temperature is correct, that is in a sense an illusion, because you're using a different term to describe the same thing.
But that's not the definition of an illusion. An illusion is something you think is there that is not there.
Well, because
an emergent phenomenon is absolutely there. It's just that you don't need to use it if you use a more fine-grained description. And I would put free will in that category.
But there's a difference between something that's emergent that can be predicted from the laws of the fundamental level, and something that's emergent from the fundamental level that in principle could not be predicted.
Right, and I would call those the sensible and the silly notions of emergence. So I'm using the sensible notion of emergence.
So you would say sensible is a pure reductionist point of view, that in principle, every emergent thing, of which free will is one, can ultimately, in principle, be predicted from lower level, more fundamental.
That's right. It's what is called sometimes weak emergence in the philosophy literature. And it is the thing for which every experiment ever done by every scientist on Earth is completely consistent.
Right. And so you should not be uncomfortable with someone else saying that there's no such thing as free will.
I think what they mean is that they don't find it useful to use free will language, and that's fine with me.
Right. But in principle, you don't disagree with them. I mean, so in reality, there's no fundamental daylight between your position and someone who would say there is no free will because everything is determined by Schrodinger's equation or the structure of the universe or whatever it is. And what we think we have in free will is not the case.
My ontology is the same as someone who doesn't want to use free will talk, but I think they are being just as silly as someone who I say, what is the temperature in the room? And they start listing the position and velocity of every molecule of air.
And so you're using free will as a shorthand to describe the totality of all those molecules.
Exactly, just the way we use words like planets and people and dogs and cats to describe some emergent macroscopic phenomena.
Well, there's a little bit of a difference here, because when you're describing physical objects, that's one thing, that's easy to understand. But we're talking about free will. We have a sense that I can really make choices, that what's going to happen 5 seconds from now, I have a choice.
Free will is a feature of the way that we talk about human beings in exactly the same way that conservation of energy is a feature of Newtonian mechanics.
Okay, and so therefore your ultimate conclusion about free will?
I think it's a perfectly valid way to talk about how human beings behave. It's perfectly valid to assign responsibility to people who make choices. There is nothing about it that in any way contradicts the fact that we are parts of the wave function of the universe evolving according to the laws of physics.
Which to me says there is no free will.
That's okay. You can use the words in whatever way you want. It's what we believe about the nature of reality that ultimately matters.